Hello, I'm your host Jim McClean. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the BanterFlix movie review show here on NvTv. Tonight in the studio, I'm joined by Jim McMorrow.
Hello.
James Oliver.
Hiya.
Hello to you both. We're going to be talking, as always, films on the big screen and the small screen this week. So let's have a look at what we'll be discussing tonight. We'll be reviewing David Gordon Green's The Exorcist Believer, which is out in cinemas now. We'll chat about Reptile, which is available to watch on Netflix. And since it's spooky season, we'll wrap up by having a look at Hocus Pocus as it celebrates its 30th anniversary. So that's what we've lined up for you this week, and as always, we start with a little bit of movie news. James, we can plan this better this week. Now, I know, Jim, you're a fan of the movie we're going to be talking about, but Michael Mann, he was in London for the film festival, as was I, but he has now confirmed that his next movie is going to be Heat 2. The book was released last year, kind of pseudo-prequel, kind of following on from the events, kind of set around the events of the first movie. One of the very first times I ever met you, James, you went off quite a long, more rambly even than me, about how much you loved Heat. So I'm guessing that right now you're buzzing with excitement.
Yeah, really excited. I'm super excited. I don't know what way they're going to do it in terms of the sort of prequel side of it. I know they have de-aging technology and all now in use. I don't know if that'll come into play, whether they'll recast entirely, who knows, because I do remember that it had been sort of rumoured that Adam Driver would play the young Neil McCauley, which is Robert De Niro's character from the film. At London Film Festival, I believe the article I read, he didn't really give comment on it as such, and he kind of skimmed over it. But to hear it's finally happening and he's going all in on it is amazing. So I don't care, take as long as you need, take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. I'm willing and ready to just wait patiently. The fact that it's happening is just, yeah, super excited.
I am a fan of Heat, not to the same extent as you, James. I do love it. I think, we think of that classic bringing together of Pacino and De Niro on screen together. It is a moment of cinematic history, and it is a pure kind of hard-boiled Michael Mann feature. Part of me is of the persuasion, and I know we're going to be talking about a very different kind of legacy sequel tonight with The Exorcist Believer. It's a scent of maybe it's one of those great on-made projects. We've had the book, maybe leave it at that. But I don't know, Jim, we've never really discussed with you about Heat. We did say just before we started, are you a fan of Heat? And you looked at me with a look of pure disgust as go, yes, of course I am. So, you excited about this?
I'm very intrigued by it because I've read the book. I think the book it's a really, really good read. It's the juxtaposition between prequel and sequel is going to be interesting because, as you say, James, I don't know how they're going to exactly pull that off. I'm kind of hoping they don't use digital de-aging because I kind of think that technology, regardless of the film, hasn't worked so far. But if they keep the story the way it is in the book and they find it, I'm happy enough if they recast, that's fine. But if they keep the story the way the same is in the book, I think that it'll be a really good movie.
Yeah, I think recasting for me would be the way to go. Moving on, because we do have a tight half-hour runtime. Local filmmaker Jim, I know you'll be interested in this, but we had the confirmation last week, just after we had recorded the episode, that Blade Runner 2099 won't be filmed here. It was much lauded that it was going to be here. Then we had the writer's strike and the actor's strike, which has played into that. Sad news, it's not going to be here. Coming back to you, Jim, I was intrigued by this series, and then even more so was the fact, it's like, it's going to be filmed here, locally. I would have added, if any more interest was needed in that project. I'm still going to watch it. I'm not going to huff. I'm not going to be that much. But from a local filmmaking point of view, sad to see that project go from here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the local crews here and the facilities that we have and so forth are kind of second to none in Europe, and it's kind of sad to see that they're not being as fully utilised as they can be. What I do hope is that we can maybe turn this negative into a positive and kind of say, okay, well, let's farm this out to more local sort of based films and really establish ourselves not just as a place to make films in, but to actually make them ourselves and create a sort of local industry. That would be amazing.
Yeah, totally agree, because I know the likes of Chris Baugh, who did Boys from County Hell and Bad Day for the Cut, they talked about how the local filmmaking scene, it's been revolutionised by the preference by the likes of Game of Thrones being filmed here, how it's improved the standard of crews here. James, coming to you, it's sad that it's not going to be filmed here. I was intrigued by the project. I think it was going to be on Amazon Prime, I think, if I'm correct. But as I say, I'm still going to watch the series. I'm not going to hold any grudges, but sad that it's not been filmed here.
Yeah, of course, yeah. As Jim just mentioned there about it, yeah, it is. You know, anytime a big project like that is, you know, it's kind of set to be filmed here, it brings in interest. It brings in, you know, just kind of like a spotlight to our country and our city, which is always a good thing. You know, I'd like to think in recent years we've placed ourselves on the map with the likes of Game of Thrones and the likes of Dungeons and Dragons that was filmed here as well. I know you've talked about that before with guests on the show. So yeah, it is disappointing, but I'd like to think that, okay, it's not a win this time, but maybe something else will come along and can pick up the placement, and, you know, hopefully it's just as good, if not better. So
yeah. Totally agree. And I know the other thing I'll say very, very quickly, Belfast Film Festival, I know has announced its programme this week. We don't have time right now to go into the details about it. I know they've already announced the opening and the closing films for this year's. And I know at Halloween they have Haunted Belfast is going to be at the Queen's Film Theatre on Halloween night. So loads to look into. We'll be talking about that in more details next week. But I think right now we'll move on with considerable glee and discuss the first film of tonight.
What do you think evil is? I'll tell you what I think it is. We're born in this world with hope and dreams and a desire to be happy.
Dad?
Something's going on with my daughter.
No! No!
It's happening to my daughter too.
The devil has one wish.
Wherever those girls went, they brought something back with them.
To make us lose faith.
But I believe you can help get our daughters back.
To kill it in us. And the devil never gives up.
She knows who I am. Where's the other girl?
So that's a clip of The Exorcist Believer. Didn't get a chance to talk about this last week. We decided to spend our time talking about the original, the 50th anniversary of that film, which is back in cinemas as part of our spooky season showcase. So this is David Gordon Green. Did such a fantastic job. Note the sarcasm in my voice with the retooling of the Halloween franchise. Jim McMorrow, you might not see through your jacket. You have a lovely John Carpenter Last Exits Nowhere t-shirt on that has Halloween Pride Centre in there. You were a bit more upbeat about those films than I was. I was not a huge fan of what David Gordon Green did with over the three films. This is the first part now of a supposed trilogy. We have The Exorcist Believer out in cinemas now. What's your general thoughts, Jim?
I think, first of all, I'm getting the sense I'm going to be in the minority whenever I say this, but I actually quite liked it. Now, here's the thing. It can't hold a candle to the original. It just can't. In terms of, the original's notoriety and so forth, it's never going to be that film and never going to bring anything that new and extreme to cinema. I accepted that before I went in, and I think as a result I had a much better time than what the average audience member seems to be having. I think that, David Gordon Green is, I know you're not a fan of those movies, but I think he's a very interesting, intelligent filmmaker. I interviewed him for our upcoming documentary. The guy's a student of cinema, he's wonderful and he's very entertaining. And I think that The Exorcist Believer it's a film of two halves. I think the first half is great. The first hour, I think, is pretty faultless. I think the character development's very interesting. I think he's managed to sort of do things that the original did, like levels of uncomfort with the medical exams and so forth, that the first one, also did. I think it's when it starts becoming a legacy sequel, it starts to fall apart. Ellen Burstyn's kind of in there for no real reason other than legacy, and she's kind of criminally underutilized. I think the main problem with it is, whereas in the first one, and I watched the first one right before we went in to see this one, there's a longevity to the diagnosis of exorcism, and you know, the character of Chris McNeil is like pushed to the absolute limit and kind of decides there's nowhere to go except exorcism. In this one, it's kind of a flash in the pan. You know, it's literally one scene to the next, he's like convinced they need an exorcism. It doesn't have the sense of drama that the original does, and as a result, I don't think the exorcism itself works and is anything other than the typical sort of last exorcism of Emily Rose Fur that we've seen, you know, replicated numerous times over the years. But overall, I do think the film was pretty interesting. I think that it's, as I say, I can't hold a candle to the original, but I think the little tributes, the little moments in there, I think the cinematography is incredible. Michael Sims is amazing. The makeup by Chris Nelson is truly terrifying. And I think it has a lot of elements to it that were more positive than negative. And I don't think it deserves the hate that it's getting.
Okay, well, you will be surprised. I agree with a lot of what you say. There is interesting aspects in what it's trying to do. Call me, you know, standard sequel kind of fodder. The fact that we have two possessions, I think it's more or less, it's not two different demonic entities. It's one demonic entity possessing the same two girls. That's an interesting aspect in what it's trying to do with the two family dynamics. But where it falls down, coming back to what you said, I think it falls flat in its face when it tries to go back into legacy sequel territory. It tries to kind of do something similar to what they did with the Scream reboot by bringing the older characters back, and again with the Halloween franchise, as being we'll bring Ellen Burstyn back, and we will use her then as the launch pad to go off on her own path. I think she's criminally underused. I was intrigued to how they bring her back, because she's not a Jamie Lee Curtis. She's not that type of performer. She is much more fragile, and it hints within the trailer, this is not a spoiler, about where is Reagan. I thought they were maybe going to do a Luke Skywalker, what they did with the Star Wars franchise. They don't really. But my central problem is that we have two girls. We only really have an emotional engagement with one. And the other young girl, whose name has eluded me, I apologise, but we only really see her in the clip. Again, it's in the trailer with the body and the blood in the church. She comes from a family that is of deep faith. We never have an emotional engagement with her. It's from one-sided, which, had you not tried to do the legacy sequel, took out those elements of the plot, you could have maybe given much more time for both characters. I don't hate it in the way that some, and the vitriol and the nastiness that it's going towards it, but I do think it's a missed opportunity. James, where are you going to weigh it?
Absolutely god-awful. Now, I will say this, I did not get a chance to attend any of the screenings of the original when it was playing, which I'm quite disappointed in, because I wanted to, just due to other conflicts. So I went into this, had heard nothing but bad reviews about it, negativity, but I always like to try and keep a bit of an open mind. And I went in, and much like yourself, Jim, I sat for it. Terrible. Not once you said yourself you didn't feel creeped out, you didn't feel unnerved by it. Me and my girlfriend were the same. We just sat there, just bored. You'd also said people in the audience there, when you saw it, were quite, you know, they seemed to enjoy some of it. We had people beside us, you know, oh, jump scared, you know. And no, me and Sarah sat there just, you know, just kind of armrest on the chair, you know, just waiting for it to be over. You take the Exorcist title off it, it would not have gathered as much attention, I think, as any other possession film in the past decade, and there's been a lot of those. It's cheesy in parts, some of the dialogue, you know, like here's a super Christian religious belief family, you know, here's a single parent trying to raise his daughter, oh, they have conflicts, you know, it's just so generic, it's boring. I can't even give props to the double exorcism. I feel like that's just, you know, just something they tried to coin in there to be like, oh, look, like we're edgy. It's like the devil taking over 2 girls. There's not even a possession scene in it, you know. It's like they go missing for 3 days, turn up 3 days later, and it's like, oh my God, we're possessed. You know, and just the hospital scene. It's a terrible, terrible film. And the legacy characters as well. I know, I know you just said her name, but I can't think off the top of my head. But from the original, I hope she just took her paycheck, was like, right lads, I'm out, because it did a huge disservice to her. I know she was such a huge part of the original. Hated it, and I posted my own thoughts on it, like yourself, Jim, over on Facebook and Instagram. No, wouldn't care to revisit it anytime soon. Probably won't sit through the second and third entries. It was just that bad. So.
Okay, well, I will say, I mean, Ellen Burstyn, she had retired from acting. She was persuaded back with I think she's a teacher now, and I think the studio have promised a rather large scholarship so that's probably worked in her favour. So I think we're mixed on this one. So with that, we'll move from the big screen to the small screen and see what we think about our next film this evening.
Can I show you something strange?
Ow!
That's a bite.
It was the dentals that got Ted Bundy.
Is there anyone you can think of who might have done this?
A few nights ago, this guy showed up at my house, acting strange.
Strange in what way?
So that's a look at Reptile. It's streaming now on Netflix. I'm going to come to you first, James. So we have Benicio del Toro, hard-boiled detective, perfect bit of casting. Grant Singer is the director here, making his directorial debut. He's worked on a lot of musical videos, so there will, of course, be comparisons, I believe, undoubtedly, with David Fincher. In that sense, Del Toro is a producer on this, also co-wrote the screenplay. So this is very much his baby. So, as I said, we have him as a hard-boiled detective trying to solve at the start what seems like a fairly routine murder investigation with the ever so sleazy Justin Timberlake's partner coming to an untimely end. What do you think, James?
Really enjoyed it. Yeah, really enjoyed it. For fans of like the slow burner, it's definitely that. So if you don't like the slow kind of build-up, I'd say give it a miss, because it does take a bit of time to get into, but I appreciate crime thrillers like this, you know, doesn't go all in guns blazing. It takes its time, introduces to the characters, the subplots, you know, the kind of interactions with different characters. Benicio del Toro, fantastic. Alicia Silverstone, I haven't seen in God knows when, probably since Batman and Robin back in the 90s. And then Justin Timberlake, give credit where it's due. He's not a bad actor. He's done this and what was the other one? A few In Time or something like that. Yeah. So overall, solid film, solid sort of detective-esque flick. Kind of gave me notes of the likes of Wind River or the first True Detective season. Also, given it's set within Scarborough, I really liked. There's a series of books that I read by John Connolly. Some of them are set within that sort of town, sort of give it a kind of sense of, you know, like on-screen presence, and to know what that looks like was very interesting to me. It just clocks in over 2 hours. It was on my watch list already, and then you'd mentioned it, and I was like, happy days. So I was pleasantly pleased by it. I mean, it's your, you know, typical kind of genre film, but for the price of a Netflix subscription, I'm happy enough to take it and would definitely recommend it, yeah.
You mentioned True Detective, long-form storytelling. Part of me did think that this would maybe suit that structure, because I think it starts strongly. Justin Timberlake is on full-on sleaze mode. I mean, he does give a good performance. I think it sags in the middle. That's what I find. I think it sags in the middle, and by the time it starts to get interesting, personally, I'd find myself a little bit exasperated by the film. It tested my patience. Other filmmakers, as I mentioned, we've seen the likes of David Fincher kind of tackle these type of films in the past. Because we have this director coming from the music film scene or doing music videos, there will be comparisons to Fincher. It's not as stylized as that. He's not a David Fincher. I don't mean that in any disrespect. Visually, I think it's fab. It's the same DOP that It Follows, a horror film I love. I know we're going to be talking about that next week. Visually, it's stunning. I can't fault the performances. I think my criticism possibly is the narrative, in the sense that I think the screenplay is a little bit baggy, it needs a little bit more, it needs to be cut with a chainsaw, and the fact that it is a genre film, it's a well-made genre film, working within the genre. I've seen it before, I've seen it better, but it's perfectly serviceable. I wouldn't say to anybody, don't watch it. I just think there's other films I would recommend above this. Jim, where are you going to weigh in?
I'm a bit like yourself, actually. If I'm honest. I think the film itself has an awful lot of individual aspects that really, really work. And Benicio del Toro's great, as he always is. I think Justin Timberlake's really good. Michael Pitt, kind of takes the lead from Jared Leto, and it becomes that sort of weird character, and he does that very well. I think photographically, it's brilliant. It's interestingly, edited and so forth. I just think that those individual aspects don't form a sort of cohesive narrative. It's very fragmented in terms of its storytelling. You're kind of dealing on one hand with this rather interesting murder, but then this sort of backstory that doesn't really go anywhere, and then this, and then at a certain point, it got to the stage where I was thinking to myself, oh, this is like Copland. This is like watching James Mangold's Copland. And a little bit later on, I was like, God, I really wish I was watching James Mangold's Copland. It's just a film that we've kind of seen done before. And now, I mean, I will qualify that and say that the story itself was interesting enough to keep me entertained until the final credits, and my wife was right on the edge of her seat. But when all was said and done, we just kind of looked at each other and were just like, yeah, that kind of was missed opportunity. And again, a film that I've seen done before in a better way.
I mean, I watched this, and I shudder when I say this out loud, because I was away, I watched this on my phone, which I hate. I mean, it was not the ideal experience to watch it, but I never switched off. Watched it for the full 2 hours. I think I come back to it. I know they're not going to stick it on the poster, Jim McClean, BanterFlix, it's fine. Well, look, we're going to have to move on to something completely different. We're going to carry on, because it is October and it is spooky season. Last week, we talked about The Exorcist. This week, something very different. We're going to be talking about Hocus Pocus. It's celebrating its 30th anniversary. It's available on Disney+. I know it's getting re-released in cinemas to celebrate its 30th anniversary. So before we share our thoughts on the film, let's have a look.
Come out, my dear. You will not harm me. Will, children.
I thought they'll never come, sisters.
Greetings, little one.
'Twas I who brought you back.
Imagine. Such a pretty little child. Look at her. And she's so well fed, isn't she? Shishka, baby. Tell me, dumpling. What is the year?
1993.
Sisters? We have been gone 300 years. Well, Winnie, how time flies, huh? When you're dead.
Sisters! That is the best you're going to get out of me on a Friday evening. But yes, Hocus Pocus. What's there to dislike about this film? A great kind of... It's a strange one. We talked about Hocus Pocus 2 last year on the show when it was released straight on to Disney Plus's streaming service. I think we were all surprised by that at the time, because it just felt like a gold mine for the House of Mouse. But when we finally saw the product, many of us understood then why it had went to Disney Plus. So films celebrating its 30th anniversary. What's not to love about Sanderson sisters, 3 pantomime villains you just properly want to boo and hiss at? We're all fans of horror. It is spooky season, so Jim, I've never really went with the kind of family aspects of horror and kind of going into that genre. But are you a fan of this film?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I love any film set around the holiday of Halloween. It's my favorite holiday. And it's lovely to see it kind of represented on the big screen in something other than John Carpenter's incredible classic. I've never hissed at the Sanderson sisters. I love the Sanderson sisters. I think that, you know, the performances and so forth in this are absolutely incredible. Love Kenny Ortega's direction, love Doug Jones' you know, performance and everything. Love the music. Mick Garris is the co-writer of this, and I think it was his original idea that was initially supposed to be darker and more scary and so forth. So you know, he's a master of horror, literally, because he made up the TV show, and I think that it definitely has a foot in horror, but it manages to be funny and heartfelt and very sweet, and you know, it's kind of a holiday staple at this point, and it's like films like It's a Wonderful Life for Christmas. It just has that sort of recurring nostalgia that I keep coming back to every year, and I adore it.
And it has become a staple. Cinemas will show this. They will undoubtedly be packed out because mums will bring children, in some cases grannies who've daughters will bring children, grandchildren to see this film on the big screen. So it has that nostalgia and it has that draw, which is why I said at the time as we started about this, I was surprised Hocus Pocus 2 missed the cinema. It skipped it, went straight to the streaming service. I wasn't a fan of that film, but I will say this, we have all the love for Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, Kathleen and Jimmy. They are great as the Sanderson sisters, and we'll throw a bit of love in for Omar Katz as well. But it's the fact that the love that went into that film, not just from the performers, but everyone behind the scenes, costume sets, props, they all make that film and help create the charm that it has, which you don't see as, I mean, now the fact that stuff can get done digitally at times, CGI heavy, that's why I'll always love this stuff. I always love the original. But look, I've rambled on enough. As I say, James, you're sitting there, you're excited. You're eager to discuss Hocus Pocus. So Jim and I have been largely positive. Where are you going to weigh in on this?
Yes, I am positive to a degree. Yes, it's a Halloween staple that you just have to stick on around this time, this season of the year. Yes, it has great performances, but when I was sat watching it last night, I'm going to get crucified for this, but anyway, it's actually not really a good film. I mean, yeah, it's, you know, it's upbeat, it's, you know, happy-go-lucky. It tells a, you know, a nice wee tale about Halloween without being too dark and dramatic or like slash and gore, like, you know, you alluded to earlier about John Carpenter's Halloween films, yeah. But I was just sitting watching it being like, this is a lot more like full-on cheese, and I cringed at some of the dialogue, and I was like, oh, it's like, I don't remember it being like that when I watched it as I was like younger, growing up. And that could just be now that I've transitioned into an adult, even though I look like a 12-year-old still. But, you know, yeah, to me, it just doesn't hold that charm anymore. I mean, yes, I will still love it, but I just think it's overhyped. And I'm waiting for the mob to knock down the door here in the studio.
Yes, and where can people find you online, James? You know, that is James Oliver's view. He is not a fan of Hocus Pocus. So that is pretty much all we have time for. So if you're not already going drastically to kind of either book your tickets for the cinema or tune in to check out Hocus Pocus and Disney+, all that is left for me to do now before we go is have a look at the films we'll be discussing on next week's show.
What exactly is supposed to be following you?
I don't know.
Just pass it along.
You believe me, right?
Nothing's gonna happen.
See? Everything's okay.
Is something wrong with me?
What do you want to be going to Lourdes for anyway?
I always wanted to go there.
If you go out that door, don't bleeding bother coming back.
Miracles happen there. He could speak.
How are you, Chrissy?
My mother is dead. I'm in a place I swore I would never come back to. Hi. I wouldn't have recognized you.
40 years would do that to you.
I'd say, yeah, mixed.
Yes, but it's great to have her back.
So that's the films we'll be discussing on next week's show. All that's left for me to do now is thank my two guests here in the studio, my very own Sanderson sisters, Jim McMorrow.
Thank you.
James Oliver.
Thank you.
And thanks very much for watching at home. We'll be back next week with another episode. But for now, until then, goodbye.